Flight of the Ark II by Alexander Blade, which is a shared synonym, and nobody has claimed this story, so we don't actually know who wrote it. Originally published in Imaginative Tales, July 1956. Narrated by Tom Trussell. From a magazine feature article explaining the Ark II tragedy of 2016 AD. Spaceship aptly christened Ark II. No one has ever been able to put the blame where the blame belonged, and so the mystery of Ark II remains. Something went wrong on that ill-fated night before blast-off. Something. We'll never know what. But the tragedy of Ark II is far greater than any other spaceship mishap, because it involved the lives of helpless children. As is now known universally, the entire crew of Ark II was composed of children ranging in age from 2 to 4 years. That wasn't the idea, of course. The children were loaded aboard ship on the evening of blastoff -1. With them went food, hydroponics, all the necessary supplies for the first really long journey, a dash of 10 years' duration across the deeps of interstellar space to the planets of Alpha Centauri. The parents of the children, and a hand-picked crew, were to board ship in the morning. But there was to be no morning. Some time during the ill-fated night of blastoff -1, 14th September 2016, Ark II blasted off with its crew of sleeping children. Theoretically, Ark II was a fully automatic spaceship. That is, the cybernetic equipment in the control room of Ark II was capable of carrying the starship across the vast interstellar gulf without human hands once touching the controls. But it has never been doubted for a moment that the children aboard Ark II perished somewhere en route. Mankind can only hope that their end was a painless one. Naturally, pursuit was impossible, since Ark II was the only spaceship ever built capable of sustained flight in true interstellar space. And, as everyone knows, Project Interstellar was abandoned after the tragedy of Ark II. And, from a story which was never written, and which will not be known until the Alpha Centauri colony matures and sends its first representatives back to Earth, from a story which occurred in the year 2026, although no one aboard Ark II kept such records. The spaceship rested on the side of a mountain. It was bitterly cold there, and nearby a glacier flowed on its sluggish course down the mountain and through the green valleys below, where the river of ice became a river of water to the distant sea. The valleys were warm and lush, and they had never known the hand of man, although now, for the first time, man was near. But much had to happen there on the silent white mountain before man, interstellar man now, came down the slopes and journeyed into the valleys which had been waiting for him. The spaceship had come down with force. Almost it had crashed. The prow was crushed as if a giant metal-shod hand had dealt it a mortal blow. The starboard side was buckled and ripped from prow to atmosphere vanes. One of the atmosphere vanes hung askew and flapped with much clanging against the gleaming metal hull whenever the high mountain wind blew. Outside the ship, which bore the stenciled name Ark II on its crumpled prow, there were no signs of life. Inside the ship, starboard, there were monsters. He knew that. There was simply no doubt. Everybody said that. Not everybody that counted. Everybody. Every human being in creation. The whole world. Everybody said there were monsters to starboard. Now, somehow, the world had gone haywire. It had suddenly gone bang. It had thrown things around, big things the people had never been able to understand, as if they weighed nothing. It had injured several of the people, had broken Rafe's arm, and twisted George's back, and made Frank's nose bleed, and, worst of all, it had stopped making noise. For all his life the world had made the same steady, droning, restful noise. Now, abruptly, the noise was gone. There was a kind of keening in its place, and, whenever the keening was loudest, a clanging sound. He had liked the other noise better. And it was cold. It was unbelievably cold. There had never been a cold like this in the history of the world. The cold came from the starboard side of the world, where he knew, because everyone knew, that the monster dwelled. The cold came from there, and a freshness in the air, too, which he had never smelled before. His name was Harold, and he was leader of the gang. Funny, he thought, referring to them as the gang. They didn't like it. They were the people. That's what people got called in the books they had. People. But weren't they called gang, too? He was the leader, wasn't he? Then couldn't he call them what he wanted? He had come further starboard than any of the people had gone before. As he walked, unlatching the bulkhead doors as he went, he knew that he was growing, had grown. For once before he had come almost this far, and the latches had seemed higher over his head. That had been a long time ago. That was funny about growing. In the books they had on the world, people didn't grow, children grew. He had never learned to distinguish between people and children, which was why he preferred the word gang. Gang was general. It could mean anything. People didn't grow. Children were small, and children grew. He had been smaller. The children had been smaller. He was growing. Since he was not outstripping them, not becoming a giant among them, the people were growing too. They either didn't want to notice it, or didn't notice it actually. But they had grown, although, clearly, they were not children. How could they be children if there were no people bigger than they? On the other hand, how could they be people if there were no children smaller than they? Both good questions, Harold thought. So I say gang, and to heck with it. But the monsters are different. There isn't any doubt about the monsters, Harold thought. They live on the starboard side of the world, and they look just like the monsters in the books. Oh, they're not called monsters in the books. The books are subtle, all right. The books actually depicted the monsters as if they were part of the people, working with them and playing with them and sharing the strange, much bigger world in the books with them. But that was foolishness. The monsters actually kept to their own side of the world, and the people, the gang, Harold corrected himself, kept to its side. Were the books mistaken? Because the books showed the long-haired, bare lower-limbed, slightly smaller than people monsters as friendly and even obscurely beneficial. Harold did not think the books were mistaken. The books were never mistaken. Harold thought the books were being sophisticated about it. It was a complex idea. The books said people and monsters lived together, but people and monsters did not live together. Therefore, people and monsters were not friendly. They were enemies. Besides, there had been contacts, Harold thought, between the gang and the monsters. They were fearful memories. They had always resulted in violence, in blackened eyes and twisted limbs and bruised bodies on both sides. Harold shuddered. Now, for the first time, actively, one of the people were actually seeking the monsters. Harold was seeking them. The bang had come from starboard, from the monsters, stopping the familiar lifelong noise, twisting the machinery, injuring the people. So had the bleak, cold wind. Harold thought the monsters knew about it. Harold thought the monsters had planned it. The monsters were subtitle. No, that wasn't the word. There were subtitles in the books, all right. Subtle, that was it. Subtly, the monsters had planned everything. The monsters had made war on the people only sporadically during Harold's lifetime. Now it was an all-out attack. Harold had to find a monster and confirm this. He did not like the idea, but could see no other way out. And he was afraid. Walking softly, carefully, as if he might break the surface on which he tread, Harold advanced to another between bulkhead's door and opened it. There had been a kind of weather stripping on all the doors once, but long ago Harold and the people had stripped it off the door on the side of the world. Evidently the monsters had done the same thing on their side. As a result, cold wind shrieked through the cracks. The wind really blew in earnest when Harold opened the next door. It was also incredibly, numbingly cold. Harold gaped. Ahead of him, seen for the first time, inexplicable, frightening, was the edge of the world. Not the rounded, curving back upon itself edge he had always known. Something jagged instead, something bent and buckled, and a gaping hole. A hole through which the bitter winds came. For a long time Harold could bring himself no closer to the hole. It was of monster manufacture, of course. The monsters and their war. It was more important than ever that he find a monster. But he could bring himself no closer to the jagged hole at the edge of the world, until a monster came up behind him. The first thing Harold became aware of, something jabbed against his back. It was something with a sharp point, and it jabbed hard, and it hurt. Harold lunged toward the hole at the edge of the world, but the weapon against his back moved with him, and a voice cried, "Stop, monster! I have you! I'll kill you if you try to get away!" Harold was amazed to hear the monster speak. That was one thing he hadn't thought of. The monster speaking. But the monster had called him monster, and that didn't make sense. He turned his head slowly, in order to see the monster who held him at bay. The voice said, "No sudden movements." The monster was shivering with cold, as Harold was. Odd. He hadn't thought a monster would grow cold, as people did. Up close and seen in the flesh for the first time, except in the hurried fights and raids, the monster was not horrible to look upon. Harold almost found looking upon it pleasant, until he remembered the weapon jammed against his back. "What do you want?" Harold asked. "You know what we want, monster. This cold blowing air and this hole in the world. You monsters are responsible. Well, aren't you? You want the whole world for yourselves, isn't that it? Port side isn't enough, not any more." Somehow Harold got the impression that the monster was frightened. He could not imagine what the monster was frightened of, until he realized quite suddenly that the monster was frightened of him. He began to smile, but the weapon, a sharpened length of metal strut he saw, was jabbed against him harder. "No trick," the monster said. "Just stand still." "Monster," Harold said. "You mean me?" "Why do you call me monster?" "I was thinking the same. It's a trick. Now turn around that way. Turn around and start marching." Harold turned slowly. He was not going with the monster if he could help it, because the monster would take him to starboard, where the other monsters were, and he could not let that happen. Abruptly, Harold lunged to one side and struck out with his right arm. The forearm caught the monster's own right hand like a club, and the monster's weapon flew magically from its fingers. Harold watched it sail in a quick gleaming arc through the air and toward the ragged hole at the edge of the world, and then through it. There it struck against something and bounced and rolled down a rough expanse of jumbled grey shards, and finally came to rest, end upright, in a field, a sloping field, all of white. Then something was on Harold's back, clawing at his face and trying to floor him. The monster was strong and fought with fury and desperation, but Harold was amazed to find he was very much stronger. He had taken the strength of monsters as something proverbial, but he had no trouble forcing the monster off his back, pinning the monster to the floor, and amazingly the monster began to cry. It was the last thing Harold had expected a monster would do, and he got up immediately. "Monster! Monster!" the flawed creature said. "All right, get up," Harold told it. "You're coming back with me." "You can't make me," the monster said. "I'll hurt you again," Harold threatened, then stopped. He looked down at the monster. He could not hurt it. He did not know why, but knew he would not fight with the monster again. "Get up." The monster got up, brushing itself off. The monster, Harold observed carefully now, was shaped much like a man, except that the monster was slimmer, less bulky. The monster was very pleasant to look at. I'm going out there to get my knife," the monster said. "You're coming with me." But even to Harold it did not sound very convincing. "No, don't try to stop me." "But even if I didn't take you, you couldn't go out there." "I want my knife," the monster persisted. "Come on, you're coming back with me." But it was as if the monster sensed that Harold could no longer hurt it, for a reason neither Harold nor the monster understood. Turning its back, the monster looked at the jagged hole in the side of the world, then peered anxiously through it into the face of the cold, keening wind, then looked back still more anxiously at Harold, then took a deep breath of the clear, cold air, shuddered slightly, and climbed through the hole in the world. Almost Harold could not believe his eyes. He doubted if he would have had the courage to go out there. And this, despite the fact that he had proven himself stronger than the monster. Afraid, but more curious than he had ever been in his life, Harold went to the jagged hole in the edge of the world and got his hand on the cold, rough metal, and peered outside. The monster was making its way across the sloping field of shards toward the other sloping field, the dazzlingly white one in which the weapon had come to rest upright. The wind blew against Harold's face while he watched, making him squint. He expected catastrophe momentarily, and did not know where it would come from. He watched the monster edge out onto the field of white. Something else came all at once into his field of vision. He had read of such things, but had never seen them. There were none in all the world. Animals. It was a large animal with a shaggy white coat, and it walked on all four legs, a shuffling but deathly quiet kind of walk, and it had a large snout, which Harold knew would contain wicked teeth. It was larger than the monster whom Harold had bested, and larger than Harold too, and the monster outside did not know the animal was there. "Hey!" Harold called a warning. At first he did not know quite why he called. The monster whirled to face him. It's nice to look at face, frozen in a look of horror when it saw the animal. The animal made a hideous noise and lumbered on, faster now, with no need for quiet. The good-looking monster stood transfixed, not half a dozen strides from the weapon it was seeking. It was very cold out there, Harold knew. It was dangerous. It was not warm and snug as the world had been before its accident. It was frightening. But the monster needed him. Monster? So what if the monster needed him? When the animal struck, it would mean one monster less. Time seemed suspended for Harold. Through his mind in swift succession ran pictures from the books he had read. There were many, many books in the world. They did not speak of monsters as monsters. They spoke of them as women, or as girls, because somehow, Harold thought now, it was proper to consider himself not a man or a person, and not a child, but something intermediary, a boy. And it was proper to consider the monsters they had always feared, not as monsters, not as women, female persons, whatever a female was, but as girls. It came to Harold like a flash of inspiration, and that wasn't all. He had defeated the monster, the girl. It had been easy. He was the stronger. But he had not been able to finish her off. It was wrong for him to finish her off, to hurt her. A new feeling welled up within him, forcing every other feeling from his being. He had never experienced it before. A feeling of protection. He felt somehow, oddly, responsible for the girl's well-being. He had to help her. He had to go out there and protect her. It seemed now the most natural thing in the world. He was amazed that no one ever thought of it before. The animal was very close to her, roaring and rearing up for a moment clumsily on its hind legs. It was even bigger than Harold thought. The girl screamed and screamed. Then, finally, she began to run, and so gained a few seconds' reprieve. Harold leaped through the jagged hole in the edge of the world, aware of the intense cold, of the need for haste. He plunged into the dazzling field of white. It was numbingly cold. He plucked the long metal strut from it. The strut was half as long as Harold's arm. It looked as if it had come from a piece of machinery aboard the world and had been sharpened against a rough, hard surface into a weapon. Harold hefted it and whirled. The animal had cornered the girl on the ledge of rock beyond the dazzling white field. It seemed in no great hurry now. It seemed almost to be relishing the fruits of its chase. Then suddenly it reached up and swatted at air with its forepaws. The girl moved back, dumb with fear. The animal swatted again, closer. Harold bellowed as he charged. He hit the animal on the dead run before he could swat for the girl a third time. He landed on its back, and as it roared fearfully and went charging again across the field of dazzling white, he raised the metal strut weapon and brought it down with all his strength below the left shoulder. He felt it go in slowly, through muscle, and then grate between bones, and then his hand rested on the animal's shaggy hide. The wounded animal stood upright on its hind legs and tried to throw Harold, but he clung grimly, using his legs, wrapping them as far around the muscular body as they would go. Then he withdrew the long knife, and it came away red, and even as the animal lay down suddenly in the field of white, trying to roll over on Harold and crush him, he plunged the knife in again. They rolled over in the field of white, and it was soft and very cold. The animal staggered to its feet again, roaring horribly. Harold withdrew the knife and plunged it into the animal's red-streaming side a third time, and this time the animal rolled over on its side, and a noise rattled in its throat, and then Harold felt the great body beneath him go limp. He got up groggily and went to the girl. She had watched everything. She was coming down from the rock now, smiling shyly. She was no longer afraid of the dead animal or of Harold. "This is a grim and cold place," Harold said, "with real monsters in it," and he pointed at the dead beast. "You saved my life." "I am called Harold," he said. "Jean. My name is Jean." "Jean. Jean, listen. If the world is wounded or dead now, and if we, somehow, have reached this different and vastly bigger world, why then is it a cold place full of horrors?" "Harold, Harold," she murmured, and took his hand. He followed her, liking the feel of her hand nestled in his bigger one. "From the top of the rock," she said, "I could see a long way. I could see. But come." They climbed the rock together. and together gazed down on the balmy green valley at the foot of the mountain. It was very beautiful. It was, how shall I say, thought Harold. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life, lushly green and warm, and even up here you could get its scent in your nostrils, heady and fresh and living. And dimly there was the sound of rushing water, and Harold knew, somehow, the wind would not be blowing so fiercely down there. "We must tell the others," Jean said. They walked back toward the world, the ship, back past the dead animal. "Harold?" Jean asked, and he nodded. Even after we tell the others, Harold, and explain to them how we are girls and you are boys, and none of us monsters, even after that, Harold, after all that, and after we lead them back out here and down into the green place?" She was blushing. "Yes," Harold said. "Harold, oh Harold, even after all that, can we still be special friends, you and me?" Instead of answering, Harold squeezed her hand. Then, together, they went back inside the ship. The long journey was over. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. You know, many of these stories were written in a time where 50 years ago was in the future.